Get this woman out of my club, now! Lucian Kensington's voice cut through the entire dining room like a blade. He was pointing, actually pointing his finger inches from his pregnant ex-wife's face, while 40 people in evening wear sat frozen glasses mid-air, breath held. Cassandra didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't look at his finger, or his face, or his rage. She looked at the floor manager standing 6 feet away, the man who had just spent 30 seconds deciding whose order to follow, and watched him choose. He turned to Lucian and said, "Sir, I'm afraid that's not something I'm able to do." Subscribe now. The night had started the way most Tuesday evenings did, at the Heritage Dining Club, with the low murmur of old money and careful conversation with crystal glasses, catching candlelight with the particular kind of quiet that exists only in rooms where every person present believes they belong there by birthright. The maitre d' moved between tables with practiced invisibility. Waitstaff appeared and disappeared without disrupting the current of conversation. The Heritage was not simply a restaurant, it was a statement. A room that said without speaking that certain doors remained closed to certain people and always would. Lucian Kensington had been a member for 11 years. He walked in at 7:43, which was 8 minutes later than he preferred, because his driver had taken the wrong approach on K Street. That 8-minute delay had already put a particular edge into his jaw, a tightness that his companion for the evening, a woman named Simone, who wore her ambition as openly as she wore her perfume, had learned to read and carefully avoid. She walked half a step behind him. She knew her role without being told. The hostess greeted Lucian with the particular warmth reserved for members who tipped generously and complained loudly. "Mr. Kensington, your usual table is ready. Corner booth, east side." "Obviously," he said, already moving past her. He did not check his coat. He did not pause. He moved through the Heritage the way he moved through every room, as if the architecture had been arranged for his convenience and the other people present were simply part of the backdrop. And then he stopped, not because something had gone wrong, not because anyone had spoken to him. He stopped because at a table near the fireplace, partially turned toward the window, sat a woman he had not expected to see. A woman he had, in fact, spent considerable legal and emotional energy attempting to make disappear from his life entirely. Cassandra, his ex-wife, the woman whose name was still on certain documents he preferred not to think about, the woman who was undeniably, visibly, unmistakably pregnant. Lucian Kensington stood very still for a moment, and then something shifted in him. Not grief, not guilt, not the complicated weight of what their marriage had been and what its ending had cost both of them. What shifted in him was simpler and uglier than any of that. It was irritation, and beneath the irritation, a particular kind of pride that required an audience. "What is she doing here?" he said. It was not a question. It was the first word of a verdict. Simone followed his gaze. Her expression remained carefully neutral. "Lucian? No." He was already adjusting his jacket. "No, this is not acceptable." Cassandra had not looked up. She sat with a cup of tea held in both hands, the steam rising slowly, her attention turned toward the window where the lights of Georgetown were beginning to appear through the glass. She wore a simple dark dress. Her hair was down. She looked, if anything, like a woman who had arrived early for something and was content to wait. She did not look like a woman who expected trouble, which meant she did not see Lucian moving toward her until his shadow fell across her table. "Cassandra." She looked up. Her expression did not change. There was no flicker of alarm, no instinctive pulling back, no performance of surprise. She simply looked at him the way you look at weather, acknowledging its presence without being particularly affected by it. "Lucian," she said, "what are you doing here, having tea?" He glanced at the cup. He glanced at her stomach. A muscle in his jaw moved. "This is a private club." "I'm aware. Members only." "Yes." He waited for her to offer something, an explanation, a guest pass a name she was accompanying. She offered nothing. She simply held her tea and waited for him to continue, which he did because Lucian Kensington had never in his adult life been comfortable with silence that he hadn't created himself. "I don't know who brought you in here," he said, his voice dropping to the particular register he used when he wanted something to sound like a warning without technically being one. But this establishment has standards, and the fact that you're sitting here alone looking like—" His eyes moved to her stomach again. "That suggests to me that whoever signed you in either made a mistake or is about to find themselves in a very uncomfortable conversation with the membership committee." Cassandra looked at him for a long moment. "Are you done?" she asked. The quiet simplicity of it landed harder than he expected. Around them, 2 nearby tables had gone still. Not obviously, these were heritage people trained from childhood in the art of appearing not to listen while hearing everything. But the stillness was there. Lucian felt it, and feeling it made him worse. "I want to speak to the manager," he said loudly enough now that the performance had begun in earnest. He turned and raised a hand, and a floor manager named Gerald, who had been approaching with some anxiety already visible in his posture, came forward with the careful speed of a man walking towards something he would prefer to walk away from. "Mr. Kensington," Gerald said. "This woman," Lucian said, gesturing toward Cassandra with the confidence of a man accustomed to having his gestures obeyed, "is sitting in a members-only establishment without verification. I want to know who authorized her entry, and I want the situation corrected." Gerald looked at Cassandra. Something moved across his face, something too brief and too carefully controlled to name. "Of course, Mr. Kensington. I'll look into it immediately." "Don't look into it. Handle it." "Yes, sir." Gerald did not move immediately. He glanced once more at Cassandra, and this time Lucian caught it. That glance. The way Gerald's eyes moved to her as if seeking not instruction exactly, but something. Confirmation, perhaps. Direction. The look of a man checking in with someone whose response he was waiting for. Cassandra gave the smallest nod, so small that if Lucian hadn't been watching, he would have missed it. Gerald excused himself. "Still running the room through other people," Cassandra said, lifting her tea again. "That hasn't changed." "What hasn't changed?" Lucian said, pulling out the chair across from her, and sitting without being invited, a power move so automatic he probably wasn't conscious of it, "is your talent for placing yourself in situations you don't belong in." Says the man who just sat down at my table. Simone had positioned herself slightly behind Lucian's left shoulder, the way a second positions themselves at a dual present, but technically separate. She was watching Cassandra with an expression that mixed curiosity with a careful kind of assessment. "I want to be very clear with you," Lucian said. "I don't know what this is. I don't know if you're here to make some kind of scene or if someone thought it would be amusing to arrange this, or if you simply have nowhere else to go because whatever arrangement you currently have clearly isn't—" He paused, letting his gaze move over her once, "working out the way you planned." Cassandra set her cup down. She set it down with the kind of care that is more deliberate than casual. The kind of care that means something. "You know what I find interesting," she said. "I can't imagine. You're still doing that thing where you assume the most humiliating explanation for a situation is automatically the correct one." She tilted her head slightly. "You assumed I married you for money. You assumed my lawyer was bluffing. You assumed the settlement terms were negotiable." A small pause. "You have a remarkable record of assuming wrong." The table to their left had completely stopped pretending to have a separate conversation. An older woman in pearls was looking directly at her water glass with the focused attention of someone who was in fact listening to every word. Lucian's voice went flat. "I don't know what you think is happening here, but let me tell you what actually is. You were removed from my life, legally, financially, and every other way that matters. Whatever is happening with your—" another glance at her stomach situation, "it has nothing to do with me. And you sitting in this room in this club is an intrusion, and I will have it addressed." "You already tried that," Cassandra said. "Gerald's been gone for 4 minutes." Lucian turned. Gerald had not returned. And the thing was, that was wrong. That was not how Gerald operated. Gerald was the kind of floor manager who resolved situations with the speed and invisibility of a stage magician who appeared sordid and vanished before anyone's soup went cold. 4 minutes was not Gerald's timeline for anything. Lucian turned back. "He's handling it." "He's making a call," Cassandra said simply. "To whom?" She didn't answer. She lifted her tea again and turned slightly toward the window as if the conversation had reached a natural resting point that she was content to observe from a distance. It was this specific movement, this turning away, that made Lucian's voice rise. "Don't dismiss me," he said. "Don't you dare sit there and dismiss me like I'm—" "Like you're what?" She looked back at him, and for the first time in the conversation, something in her voice shifted. Not anger, not hurt. Something colder and more precise than either. Like you're the man who had me escorted from our building at 11 p.m. Like you're the man who told his attorney that my pregnancy was, and I'm quoting, a complication to be managed. Like you're the man who called me a gold digger in front of your board of directors at the Meridian dinner. Loud enough that the woman seated 2 chairs from me asked me afterward if I was all right. Silence. Not the polite, performed silence of heritage patrons pretending not to listen. Actual silence, the kind that falls when something has been said that changes the air pressure in a room. Simone had taken a small, involuntary step back. Lucian recovered. He was good at recovering. 11 years of boardrooms and hostile negotiations had made him extremely good at recovering. That is a characterization of events that is recorded, Cassandra said, on 3 separate devices, by 2 witnesses who have already provided statements. Another silence. "What are you doing?" he asked. And now finally something had entered his voice that he didn't intend to put there. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to it. The cold draft that arrives before the door opens. "Right now," Cassandra said, "having tea." "Cassandra." Gerald returned. He was accompanied by a woman Lucian did not immediately recognize, a woman in her 50s. Dark blazer, small pin on her lapel, that Lucian would later identify as the Heritage Alliance emblem, but which right now he registered only as official. She walked with the posture of someone who had entered difficult rooms many times and found them manageable. "Mr. Kensington," Gerald said, "I've asked Director Harmon to come speak with you directly." "Director of what?" Lucian asked. "Guest Services and Membership Review," the woman said. Her name was Patricia Harmon. Her voice was pleasant and entirely without apology. "I understand you have some concerns about this evening." "I have a concern about unauthorized guests in a members-only facility." "Yes." Patricia nodded. "Of course, I'd like to address that." She turned to Cassandra. "Are you comfortable? Can we get you anything while we sort this out?" Lucian blinked. The question had been directed at Cassandra, not at him, at Cassandra. "I'm fine, thank you," Cassandra said. "The tea has been wonderful." "I'm glad." Patricia turned back to Lucian. "Mr. Kensington, I want to be transparent with you. The guest you're concerned about is not here as a guest." Lucian felt the tension in his chest release slightly. "Then she's here without authorization." "She's here as a principal," Patricia said. "A beat. I'm sorry. This is not the appropriate setting to review specific membership structures." Patricia said, her voice as smooth and careful as something that had been practiced. "But I want to make sure you understand that the lady at this table is not in violation of any club policy. She has every right to be here. More than that, she has standing here that I'm not in a position to override or discuss further in this context." Lucian stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means," Patricia said, "that I'd like to invite you to continue your evening at your table. We have your corner booth ready and Marco is standing by. I'm not going anywhere until someone explains." "Lucian." Cassandra's voice, quiet, and somehow in the context of this moment, quieter than everything else. "Go sit down." He turned to look at her. She was watching him with an expression that was not unkind. It was something stranger than unkindness. It was the expression of a woman who knows the ending of something and is watching the other person take a very long time to understand it. "This isn't over," he said. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He stood. He straightened his jacket. He turned. And as he walked back toward his corner booth, he felt something that he had almost never felt in his adult life. The precise, disorienting sensation of having walked into a room believing it belonged to him and discovering mid-stride that the architecture was different than he remembered. Simone slid into the booth across from him. She said nothing. She had the wisdom in this particular moment to say nothing. Lucian ordered a scotch. He looked across the room. Cassandra was turned toward the window again. Her tea was still in her hands. She looked peaceful, genuinely unperformatively peaceful, the way a person looks when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. The scotch arrived. Lucian drank it faster than he normally did. "Who is she?" Simone asked finally. "My ex-wife," Lucian said. "I know that," Simone said. "That's not what I asked." Lucian did not answer, because the honest answer, the one forming unwillingly in the back of his mind as he watched his ex-wife be approached quietly and with visible respect by two members of the Heritage staff, was that he didn't know. He had been married to Cassandra for 3 years. He had filed for divorce 16 months ago. He had spent those 16 months constructing a story about who she was, dependent calculating beneath him, lucky to have had access to his world for as long as she did. That story had just developed a crack, a small one. But Lucian had built enough structures in his life to know that small cracks in weight-bearing walls were the ones that mattered. He ordered another scotch. Across the room, a waiter brought Cassandra a plate she had not visibly ordered. She thanked him by name. The waiter smiled the real kind, not the professional kind, and moved away. Lucian's second glass arrived. He watched Gerald cross the room, not toward the kitchen, not toward another table, but toward a small alcove near the east entrance where the Heritage's private phone lines were kept. Gerald was on the phone before he disappeared from view. He was speaking quickly, his posture angled away from the room in the manner of someone whose conversation required privacy. "Who is he calling?" Simone asked. "I don't know," Lucian said. "Should you find out?" Lucian looked at his glass. "I intend to." He stood rebuttoning his jacket and moved toward the alcove with the measured ease of a man who owned whatever room he was walking through. Gerald heard him coming, or perhaps sensed the displacement of air, and half turned the phone still at his ear. "One moment," Gerald said into the phone, then lowered it. "Mr. Kensington." "Who are you calling?" "I'm managing a logistical matter, sir." "Related to her?" Gerald held his gaze. "I'm not able to share specifics of operational—" "Gerald!" Lucian moved closer. His voice went quiet in that deliberate way that was meant to remind people of power differentials. "I have been a member of this club for 11 years. I have brought 12 new members through this door. I sit on the informal advisory board. Do not manage me with talking points." Gerald looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that Lucian felt the strangeness of it, the fact that Gerald was actually looking, rather than immediately deferring. "Mr. Kensington," Gerald said, "I have a great deal of respect for your membership history here, and I want to serve you well this evening. But there are aspects of this situation that are above my authority to discuss with you, and I have to ask you to trust me when I tell you that everything is being handled appropriately." "Above your authority," Lucian repeated. "You're the floor manager." "Yes, sir." "What is above the floor manager at a restaurant, Gerald?" A pause. "This evening, sir, quite a bit." Lucian stared at him. Gerald's expression remained respectful, pleasant, and absolutely immovable. It was the expression of a man who had been given very clear instructions and intended to follow them precisely. Lucian returned to his table. He did not finish his second scotch. He was watching the room differently now, not with the comfortable authority of a man surveying territory he owns, but with the unsettled attention of a man trying to read a map he hadn't realized was upside down. The Heritage's staff was moving normally. Tables were being served. Conversations were continuing. Nothing was visibly wrong. But Lucian had made his fortune in part by understanding the anatomy of rooms, which way power flowed, who deferred to whom, where the real decisions were being made. And what he was reading now in the subtle choreography of staff movement, in the micro-decisions about which tables to attend and in which sequence, was something that did not line up with what he expected. The Heritage tonight was organized around the woman by the fireplace. He didn't understand it. He didn't have the information to understand it. But his instincts, the ones that had survived boardroom coups and hostile acquisitions and 2 very bad business cycles, his instincts were awake in a way they hadn't been in a long time. Something was wrong with his understanding of this situation. Something had been wrong with it before he walked through the door. He just didn't know what it was yet. Across the room, Cassandra finished her tea. She set the cup down with the same deliberate care she had used before. A staff member appeared within seconds to clear it and offer a refill with a deference that Lucian watched with something that was no longer irritation, but had crossed without his permission into something much closer to unease. She accepted the refill. She did not look across the room at him. She didn't need to. And somewhere in the architecture of this evening, in the way Gerald had held his gaze, in the way Patricia Harmon had called her a principal, in the way the staff moved in a pattern that Lucian couldn't quite name, but could feel the shape of something was building. He didn't know yet what it was. But he was beginning to understand that he had made an error. Perhaps not in coming here tonight. Perhaps not in speaking to her. The error was earlier than that. The error was in the story he had told himself about who Cassandra was, about what she was about, what she had been in relation to him and to the world he inhabited. That story was not holding. And in Lucian Kensington's experience, when a story stopped holding, what came next was always worse than the story itself. He sat in his corner booth. Simone had gone quiet in the particular way of someone who understands they are in a room where they cannot help and might make things worse. The candle between them burned steadily. The heritage murmured around him, and 30 feet away, his pregnant ex-wife sat by the fireplace in complete stillness, her hands around her second cup of tea, looking for all the world like a woman who had arranged this evening exactly as she intended it, and was content to let it unfold at its own pace. Lucian signaled for the check. He wasn't leaving. He was recalibrating. He was going to sit here in his corner booth, and he was going to pay very close attention. Because in 11 years of membership at the Heritage Dining Club, he had never seen a floor manager refuse to answer a direct question. He had never seen a director of guest services make a point of asking a guest, any guest, if they were comfortable before addressing the complaining member. He had never seen the staff organize themselves around a person the way they were, quietly, and without theater organizing themselves around Cassandra tonight. And he had certainly never, not once, sat in this room and felt the particular and deeply unwelcome sensation that the institution he had trusted for 11 years to reflect and reinforce his standing in the world was in this moment looking past him and toward her, the woman he had called a gold digger 40 minutes ago in front of 12 witnesses. The woman who had not raised her voice, had not cried, had not made a scene. The woman who had simply set down her teacup, looked at him once and said, "Are you done?" Lucian Kensington sat in his corner booth, and for the first time in a very long time, since before his first acquisition, since before he understood what it meant to be the most powerful person in a room, he felt the cold, specific, unmistakable weight of a question he could not answer. What exactly had he walked into tonight? And who exactly was the woman he had spent 16 months believing he had left behind? The fire burned in the heritage hearth. The candles burned at the tables. And across the room, Cassandra set down her cup, turned her face back toward the window, and rested one hand quietly on her stomach, as if she already knew, as if she had always known, as if she was simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. The floor manager's words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "Sir, I'm afraid that's not something I'm able to do." 6 words, quietly spoken. No drama in the delivery, no raised voice, no performance of defiance. Just 6 words spoken by a man named Gerald, who had worked the Heritage's floor for 9 years, and who was now standing very still, his hands clasped in front of him, looking at Lucian Kensington with an expression of absolute professional resolve. Lucian stared at him. Around them, the dining room had gone to that specific quality of silence that happens when a room full of people who are trained to be discreet collectively decide that what is happening in front of them is more important than their training. "I'm sorry," Lucian said. His voice was flat, careful. The voice of a man who was used to repeating himself only once before consequences followed. "What did you just say to me?" "I said I'm not able to remove this guest, sir." "This guest," Lucian repeated the word as if it tasted wrong. "This woman is not a guest. She is an intrusion. She is my ex-wife who has no business being in a members-only facility, and I am asking you, I am telling you to have her escorted out." Gerald did not move. "I understand your concern, Mr. Kensington, but I am not in a position to do that." "Why not?" "Because she has every right to be here." Lucian turned slowly and looked at Cassandra. Cassandra was watching Gerald with a look of quiet appreciation, the way you watch someone do something difficult, and do it well. She had not touched her tea since the confrontation began. She was simply present, completely unwaveringly present, in the way of someone who is not afraid of what happens next. "What membership does she hold?" Lucian demanded, turning back to Gerald. "Sir, membership details are confidential." I have been on the informal advisory board of this institution for 4 years. Do not cite confidentiality policies at me." Gerald held his position. "Mr. Kensington, I would ask you to lower your voice, and I would ask you respectfully to return to your table. I will personally ensure that your evening is not further disrupted." "My evening," Lucian said, and now the careful flatness in his voice had started to develop an edge, "was disrupted the moment I walked in and found her sitting here like she owns the place." From the table by the fireplace, Cassandra's voice came quiet and unhurried. "Gerald, I apologize for this. Please don't let it affect your evening." Gerald turned to her. "Not at all. Can I get you anything?" It was such a simple exchange, a woman apologizing for an inconvenience, a staff member asking if she needed something, the most ordinary 30 seconds imaginable. And yet, the effect it produced on Lucian was immediate and visceral, because what he was watching, what the room was watching, was a floor manager at a private club, turning away from an angry, demanding platinum-level member to ask the woman that member wanted removed if she needed anything. That was not a customer service decision. That was a hierarchy decision. Lucian felt it in his chest before he understood it in his head. "I need an explanation," he said, louder now, the edge fully present. "Someone in this building needs to give me an explanation right now for what is happening." Patricia Harmon reappeared. She had the timing of someone who had been waiting in a specific position for exactly this escalation. "Mr. Kensington, why don't we step to the side and I can—" "I don't want to step to the side. I want answers at this table." Patricia looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Cassandra. Cassandra gave the smallest nod. Patricia turned back to Lucian and made a decision. "All right. In the interest of clarity," she straightened. The Heritage Dining Club operates under the governance of the National Heritage Alliance. The Alliance holds final authority over membership structure, guest policies, and institutional access. Our club's board answers to the Alliance's executive leadership. A pause. The woman at this table is not here as a guest or as a member's companion. She holds a position within the Alliance's leadership structure that supersedes the authority of our club management. Silence. Not just at their cluster of tables. The entire room. "What position?" Lucian said. Patricia's expression remained professional and entirely steady. "That is not information I'm authorized to share in this setting." "Then who is authorized to share it?" "The Alliance itself." Lucian looked at Cassandra. Cassandra looked back at him. She had both hands around her teacup, now warming them, and her expression was the same as it had been since he walked in, that particular calm that wasn't absence of emotion, but was something beyond it. Like watching a body of water that runs very deep and shows nothing on the surface. "What are you?" Lucian said, and it came out differently than he intended, less like a demand, more like a genuine question, the kind that emerges when a person has been so certain of something for so long that the uncertainty arrives as a physical sensation. Cassandra considered him for a moment. "Right now," she said, "a woman having tea." The table to their left exhaled. Someone actually laughed, a brief involuntary sound immediately suppressed. Lucian heard it. His jaw tightened. "This isn't funny to me," he said. "I know," Cassandra said. "It isn't meant to be." Lucian looked at Patricia. Patricia held his gaze with the patience of someone who is prepared for this conversation. Lucian looked at Gerald. Gerald looked back with the steady resolution of a man who has been given clear orders and intends to stand behind them regardless of what is said next. Lucian had been in enough negotiations to know when he was surrounded. Not outmaneuvered surrounded. The difference was important. To be outmaneuvered suggested a contest. What he was experiencing felt less like a contest, and more like arriving at a location and discovering the geography was different from the map. He pulled out his membership card. It was a gesture he had made hundreds of times, platinum level, embossed, the physical proof of 11 years and considerable money. He set it on the table between himself and Gerald. "Run the verification," he said. "Run the full membership scan. I want my status confirmed on record so that when I take this to the Alliance's board, there is a documented trail of what happened tonight." Gerald looked at the card. He looked at Cassandra. He looked at Patricia. Patricia gave a brief nod. "Of course," Gerald said. "I'll bring the scanner." He returned in under 2 minutes. The device was small handheld, the kind used for high-level membership verification at heritage institutions across the country. Lucian had seen it used before, had seen it resolve disputes, confirm status, end arguments. He watched Gerald position it with the confidence of a man who was absolutely certain of what the result would be. The scanner read the card. A sound, not the confirmation tone, not the familiar ascending chime that accompanied successful verification. A different sound. Gerald looked at the screen. Something changed in his posture, subtle, but Lucian saw it. Something that was not surprise exactly, but was the posture of a man who had been told something was going to happen, and was now watching it happen, and was conscious of the weight of that moment. "What is it?" Lucian said. Gerald turned the device so Lucian could see the screen. The display read, "Status review pending. Refer to Alliance Authority." Lucian stared at it. "What does that mean?" he said. "What does status review pending mean? I am a Platinum member. I have been a Platinum member for 6 years." "It means," Patricia said carefully, "that your membership status has been flagged for administrative review. Until that review is complete, certain club privileges are suspended." "Suspended!" The word came out of him like air from something punctured. "By whom?" Patricia did not answer. Lucian turned to Cassandra. "By you." Cassandra looked at him steadily. "The Alliance has a compliance process. I don't personally manage membership reviews." "But you initiated it." "I didn't say that." "You didn't deny it." A pause. The fire crackled in the heritage hearth. 3 tables away, a woman was pretending to adjust her earring while watching with the intensity of someone watching the final minutes of a very long game. "Lucian," Cassandra said. And her voice changed. Not softer, exactly deeper, more direct. The voice of someone who has decided that a particular moment has arrived and intends to meet it squarely. "I have been sitting at this table for 2 hours. I ordered tea. I did not speak to anyone about you. I did not arrange this evening to confront you. I came here because I had a meeting earlier in this building, and I had an hour before my car arrived, and I wanted to sit somewhere quiet." She let that land. "You walked in," she continued. "You saw me. You made a choice about what to do with that. You made several choices in front of a great many people who are going to remember every one of them." Another pause. "The membership scanner running your card is not something I triggered. It's something that was already in process. You would have been notified by letter next week." Lucian's voice had gone very quiet. "In process for what reason?" "The development project," Cassandra said. "The Meridian Corridor project. The land acquisition in the 4th District. The Alliance has oversight authority over the historic preservation review for that district." She held his gaze. "Your project is in that district." The room was very still. Lucian felt something shift in his chest that he had not felt since the day his first company nearly went under the particular nauseating sensation of a floor you believed was solid, revealing itself to be suspended over something much colder. The Meridian Corridor was worth $400 million. It was the largest project of his career. It was the project he had spent 3 years architecting, funding, and positioning. It was the project that 3 separate investors had tied their money to on the basis of his personal guarantee that approvals were secured. "You have oversight," he said. "The Alliance has oversight," she said. "I chair the Alliance." The word fell into the room. Chair. Not member, not participant, not a seat at the table. The person who runs the table. Lucian heard the word. He understood the word. His brain was processing the word with full functionality. But the comprehension, the real comprehension, the kind that reaches from your head into your body, arrived in stages like a building, settling after an earthquake, each stage producing a new sound, a new shift, a new small collapse of something that had previously seemed load-bearing. Simone made a quiet sound from somewhere behind him. He had forgotten she was there. "You chair the National Heritage Alliance," Lucian said. "Yes." "Since when?" 14 months ago. 14 months. 2 months after their divorce was finalized. 2 months after he had walked out of that attorney's office, believing that he had severed every connection, closed every door, and reduced Cassandra to a settlement number and a name in a file. While he had been building the Meridian Corridor, she had been chairing the body that governed its approval. While he had been calling her a gold digger at industry dinners, she had been sitting at the head of a table that held authority over the institutions he moved through. While he had been constructing a story about who she was, she had been building something he couldn't see. "You knew," he said, "when I started the Meridian Project. You knew the Alliance had authority over the review." Cassandra was quiet for a moment. "I recused myself from your file, formally and on record, because I have no interest in using institutional authority for personal reasons." Her voice was even. "Which is not something I can say for every decision you made during our marriage." The reference landed. Both of them knew exactly which decisions she meant. "The review that's underway," Lucian said, "is it a compliance review or—" "It's a standard historic preservation assessment. Every project in that district goes through it." Cassandra adjusted her position slightly, a brief concession to her own physical discomfort, 9 weeks from her due date that she made, without drawing attention to it. "Your project architect submitted documentation in March. The review team found 3 discrepancies in the preservation impact statements. Your legal team was going to receive a formal notice. A beat. They still will. This conversation doesn't change that. Can the discrepancies be resolved?" Cassandra looked at him. And there it was, the question that stripped everything back. Not the anger, not the public humiliation, not the marriage or the divorce or the baby or the history. Just the question underneath everything else. The question that revealed what Lucian actually cared about when everything else was taken away. "That depends," she said, "on whether the revised documentation is accurate." "It will be. Then the process will proceed accordingly." She held his gaze. "That is how the Alliance works, Lucian. Process, documentation, evidence, not connections, not pressure, not who is standing behind which card at which dinner." A pause. "I know that's a difficult concept." He stood very still. Around them, the heritage had resumed its murmur, not fully, not naturally, but with the careful performance of people who understood that whatever the center of this evening was, it was passing through its most acute stage, and it was time to give it space. Gerald had moved discreetly away. Patricia remained at a remove present, but no longer pressing in. Simone had at some point in the last several minutes taken her glass and moved to stand near the bar, the spatial equivalent of raising a white flag. Lucian looked at Cassandra. He looked at her the way he hadn't looked at her during any of the preceding 40 minutes, not with anger, not with the performance of authority, not with the particular contempt that had been his default setting toward her since their divorce. He looked at her the way you look at something you misidentified. The corrective look, the look that precedes the admission that the map was wrong. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "When I started the project, when it was clear the Alliance territory overlapped. Why didn't you throw a lawyer through anyone? Why didn't you—" "Because it wasn't my job to manage your due diligence," Cassandra said. "You have a team, you have attorneys, you have advisors. Any one of them should have identified the Alliance's oversight authority before you broke ground." A pause. "And because, quite honestly, Lucian, the last conversation we had, you told your attorney that any further communication from me was to be treated as harassment." She looked at him steadily. "I took that seriously." The words landed with the precision of something that had been accurate for a long time and was only now being said. Lucian said nothing. A long moment passed. "The baby," he said, and then stopped, because he hadn't decided what came after that. He hadn't decided if it was a question or a statement or something that didn't have a grammatical category yet. Cassandra looked at him. Her hand moved to rest on her stomach, not a gesture of drama, just the instinctive movement of a woman 8 months pregnant who was tired and had been tired for a long time. "Is mine," Lucian said. "Not a question anymore." "Yes," Cassandra said. Another silence. This one was different from all the preceding silences. This one had weight and texture and years inside it. "I didn't know you were—" He stopped again. "No," she said. "You didn't. How long?" "Lucian." Her voice was not unkind, not warm exactly, but not unkind. "There are things that need to be discussed between us. There are real things about the baby, about the project, about several matters that are going to require actual adult conversation in an actual appropriate setting." She looked at him. "This is not that setting." He looked around the room, at the 40 people who had heard everything, at Gerald standing near the alcove, at Patricia by the east wall, at Simone at the bar studying her glass, at the heritage around him, the institution he had belonged to for 11 years, which had tonight quietly and without drama demonstrated that it did not belong to him. "No," he said, "it's not. It's—" Cassandra looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into the small bag beside her chair and removed a card. Plain, white, a name and a phone number. She set it on the table. "My attorney," she said, "not for a fight, for a conversation, when you're ready to have one." He looked at the card, but didn't take it. "The things I said," he began, "were heard by 40 people," she said, "and will be remembered. Yes." She looked at him with that particular quality that had characterized her all evening. Not forgiveness exactly, not anger, something more durable than either. "That's something you'll have to think about on your own time." She reached for her tea. It had gone cold. She set it down. And then she did something he had not anticipated. She looked at him with something that was almost sadness. Not for herself. Not the kind of sadness that wants anything in return. The kind of sadness that exists for what a person could have been and chose not to be. "You always thought power was something you held," she said quietly, "something you carried into a room and put down on the table so everyone could see it." She glanced at the heritage around them, at the room that had organized itself quietly and completely around her presence all evening. That was never what it was. Lucian looked at the room, at Gerald, at the emblem on Patricia Harmon's lapel, at the membership card still sitting on the table beside the scanner that had returned the wrong answer. He picked up the white card. He put it in his jacket pocket. And then, for the first time in this entire evening, Lucian Kensington did something that cost him more than any admission he had made in any boardroom or courtroom or difficult conversation in his adult life. He sat down, not at his corner booth, at Cassandra's table, without being invited, but differently from before, without the performance of authority or the theater of possession. He simply sat down because he was in this moment a man who had run out of rooms to walk through and needed somewhere to be. Cassandra looked at him. She didn't tell him to leave. She signaled the waiter for a fresh cup. The heritage murmured around them. The fire burned in its hearth. Outside the window, Georgetown moved through its evening indifferent and unhurried, the way cities move through everything, carrying it all forward without stopping to explain. And at the table by the fireplace, the most powerful man in the room, and the woman he had underestimated for 3 years and 16 months, sat across from each other in silence, while a waiter placed a second cup on the table and quietly withdrew. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was for the first time all evening honest. And outside in the cold Georgetown air, Lucian's driver sat in a running car and waited, as drivers do for instructions that were taking longer than expected to arrive. He checked his phone. He adjusted the heat. He looked up at the heritage's lit windows and thought nothing in particular because he was a driver, and it was not his job to think about what happened inside the buildings he waited outside of. Inside, Lucian Kensington picked up the fresh cup that had been set before him. He did not speak, neither did she. But somewhere in the room, in the way Gerald stood, in the way Patricia's shoulders had eased, in the way the heritage had resumed its normal rhythm around them, something had shifted. The verdict of the evening had been rendered, not loudly, not with ceremony, simply accurately and without appeal. The second cup sat between them untouched for a long time. Lucian's hands were flat on the table, not holding anything, not reaching for anything, just resting there the way hands rest when the person they belong to has run out of gestures. He was looking at the tablecloth. Cassandra was looking at him, not with the calm of before that particular oceanic stillness that had characterized the first hour of the evening. Something in her had shifted too, not softened exactly, but opened. The way a window opens after a storm, not because the weather is over, but because the air has changed enough to make it possible. Around them, the heritage had resumed its normal rhythm. Plates cleared, glasses refilled the low architecture of conversation, rebuilt itself table by table until the room sounded almost the way it had before Lucian walked in. Almost. There was a texture to the quiet that hadn't been there before, the particular quality of 40 people who had witnessed something and were now processing it privately while performing normalcy publicly. Gerald moved through the room with his usual precision. But twice in the space of 10 minutes, Lucian watched him glance toward the fireplace table. Not the checking glance of a manager monitoring a difficult situation. Something else. Something that looked, if Lucian were being honest with himself, like the glance of a man making sure that a person he was responsible for was all right. That glance told him more than anything Patricia Harmon had said. "How long have you been coming here?" Lucian asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Less architecture to it. Less of the careful construction that normally shaped every word he said in a professional context. Cassandra considered the question. To the Heritage, specifically, about 8 months. The Alliance has used this building for quarterly meetings since before I took the chair position. "I never saw you here." "You weren't looking for me," she said. "And I wasn't announcing myself." He absorbed that. "The staff knows you." "Yes." Gerald ran the room for my first board meeting here," she said. "He made sure everything went smoothly when I was 7 months pregnant, and the Alliance's legal director was having a very loud argument in the East Corridor." A small pause. "He's good at his job." Lucian looked across the room at Gerald. Gerald was managing a table near the entrance with the invisible efficiency that made him exceptional at what he did. Lucian had seen Gerald work this room for years and had categorized him the way he categorized most service professionals, as competent and peripheral. A person who existed in the background of important evenings. He was now understanding that Gerald's background had simply been a different foreground than the one Lucian was used to looking at. "The board meeting," Lucian said. "Who was in the room?" Cassandra looked at him with an expression that was almost amused. "Are you asking me who I know? I'm asking who the Alliance's board is." "You could look it up," she said. "It's public record." "I'm asking you." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Senator Whitmore sits on the advisory council. Diane Reese from the Cultural Endowment. James Okafor. You know James, he was at your Meridian groundbreaking." A beat. "Richard Halstead." Lucian went very still. Richard Halstead was the chairman of the Infrastructure Finance Committee, the committee that held approval authority over the tax credit structure that was funding 40% of the Meridian Corridor project. Lucian had been trying to get a second meeting with Halstead for 6 months. His calls had been returned with scheduling delays, his emails answered by assistants. His requests for even 15 minutes of Halstead's time met with the polite, impenetrable resistance of a man whose schedule was controlled by people who had decided Lucian Kensington was not a priority. "Halstead is on your advisory council," Lucian said. "He joined 14 months ago," Cassandra said. "Around the same time I took the chair." 14 months. The exact window during which Lucian's access to Halstead had quietly, inexplicably closed. "That's not a coincidence," Lucian said. "No," Cassandra said. "It isn't." She held his gaze. "Richard Halstead is a man who pays very close attention to how other men treat their wives, their former wives, the women in their professional orbit." She paused. "It's personal for him. His daughter went through something similar. He doesn't discuss it, but everyone who knows him understands it." Lucian felt the room rearrange itself again. Not the physical room, the room in his head. The map, the one he had been using to navigate his professional world for the last 16 months, the one that had seemed accurate until tonight, the one that was now revealing itself to have been based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the territory. "He knows what I said at the Meridian dinner," Lucian said. It wasn't a question. "He was 2 tables away," Cassandra said. "His wife was at the table between you." The silence that followed had a specific weight, the weight of a man understanding in real time the full architecture of a mistake he thought he had already finished making. At 7 minutes past 9, the Heritage's East Corridor door opened, and a man named Thomas Carey walked through it. Thomas Carey was 61 years old, wore a watch that cost more than most people's cars, and had the particular posture of a man who had spent decades being the most important person in rooms that were already full of important people. He was the Alliance's executive director, Cassandra's direct operational counterpart, and he had been, if Lucian had understood Patricia Harmon's earlier words correctly, the person Gerald had been calling from the alcove. Thomas Carey scanned the room, found Cassandra, walked toward her with the direct economy of someone who did not detour. He noticed Lucian as he approached. His pace did not change. His expression did not change. He simply arrived at the table and addressed Cassandra as if Lucian were a piece of furniture. "The Morrison documentation came through," he said. "Legal cleared it 40 minutes ago." "Good," Cassandra said. "Hold it until morning. I want a review before anything goes out." "Already flagged." He paused. "The Meridian file is in process," Cassandra said. "Standard review timeline." Carey nodded. His eyes moved to Lucian. A brief, accurate assessment. The kind of look that takes 2 seconds and retains everything. "Mr. Kensington," he said. "Mr. Carey," Lucian said. He knew who Thomas Carey was. He had known who Thomas Carey was for years, known him as a name on letterheads, a presence at certain functions, a voice in infrastructure circles that carried weight. He had never had a reason to understand the precise relationship between Thomas Carey and the Heritage Dining Club and the National Heritage Alliance, and the woman Lucian had spent 16 months believing he had successfully left behind. "Enjoying your evening?" Carey asked. His tone was perfectly neutral. The neutrality of a man who knew everything that had happened in this room tonight and was choosing in this moment to be impeccably professional about it. "It's been educational," Lucian said. Something moved in Carey's expression. Not quite a smile, the precursor to one. "I imagine so." He turned back to Cassandra. "Your car is confirmed for 9:45. Do you need anything before I'm fine, Thomas. Thank you." He nodded once, made brief eye contact with Lucian again, another 2-second assessment, another complete retention, and withdrew in the direction he'd come from, moving through the Heritage with the ease of a man who knew exactly where he was in every room he entered. Lucian watched him go. "Your executive director makes house calls," Lucian said. "Thomas was already in the building," Cassandra said. "He had a 7 o'clock. "With whom?" She looked at him. "Sorry," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. Another silence. Different from the others. The silences between them had been changing all evening, from the charged silence of the opening confrontation to the watchful silence of the membership scanner moment to the collapsed silence after she'd said the word chair. This silence was quieter than those, less confrontational, more exhausted. The silence of two people who have been running toward each other from opposite directions have collided and are now sitting in the rubble trying to remember what they were running toward in the first place. "I owe you an apology," Lucian said. Cassandra did not respond immediately. She waited, because she had learned in 3 years of marriage to this man that the first sentence of a Lucian Kensington apology was rarely the complete one. There was usually more. The question was always whether the more was genuine or strategic. "What I said when I walked in," he continued. "The things I've said, at the Meridian dinner, to my legal team, about you." He looked at the table. "They were wrong. They were—" He stopped. "I convinced myself of a version of you that made it easier to do what I did. And I said that version of you out loud in rooms to people. And that was wrong." Cassandra was very still. "I don't know if that matters to you at this point," he said. "It matters," she said. "It doesn't fix anything, but it matters." He nodded. He looked at her stomach. "I want to be involved," he said, "with the baby. I know I have no right to simply state that as if it's uncomplicated. I know what the last 16 months have been. But I want you to know that His voice shifted, dropped into something less constructed. "I don't want to be the kind of father my father was. And my father was the kind of man who assumed that providing money was the same thing as being present." Cassandra looked at him for a long time. "That," she said slowly, "is the most honest thing you've said to me in 4 years." The words landed softly. They were not a forgiveness and were not meant to be. But they were an acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who was precise in her language and did not say things she didn't mean, telling a man that for once, after years of performed confidence and strategic speech, he had said something real. Lucian felt it the way you feel the first warm air after a very long cold. Then his phone buzzed. He would have ignored it was in fact in the process of ignoring it, except that it buzzed again immediately, and then a third time the triple pattern that his assistant used only for matters that required his attention, regardless of context. He looked at the screen. 3 missed calls from his lead attorney, Mitchell Graves. 1 text, "Call me, now. Not tomorrow, now." Lucian looked at Cassandra. "I have to go," she said. He stood. He stepped away from the table. He found a quiet corner near the Heritage's coat room and called Mitchell back, and Mitchell answered before the first ring had fully sounded. "Where are you?" Mitchell said. "The Heritage. What's happened?" "Your Meridian partners called me 20 minutes ago, Brannigan and Associates. They've been contacted by the Alliance's compliance division." Lucian closed his eyes briefly. "About the preservation review." A pause on Mitchell's end. A pause that lasted long enough to tell Lucian that whatever came next was not going to be simple. "Lucian, the review isn't just flagging documentation discrepancies. The Compliance Division has opened a formal investigation into the land acquisition process, specifically the third parcel, the Greenway acquisition." The Greenway acquisition. Lucian felt his stomach drop 2 inches. The Greenway parcel was the foundational piece of the Meridian project, the anchor property that the entire development was built around. Its acquisition had been complex. There had been a historic designation question. There had been, if Lucian was being precise in his own private accounting of it, a moment 18 months ago, where a decision had been made about how to handle that designation question. And the decision that had been made was the expedient one rather than the correct one. He had told himself at the time that it would not become an issue. "What does the investigation cover?" he asked. His voice had gone flat in a way that had nothing to do with performance. "The designation suppression," Mitchell said. "Someone filed a disclosure complaint 6 weeks ago. The Alliance Compliance Division has had it since then. They were going to notify your team next week." A pause. "Lucian, if the designation suppression is substantiated, we're not talking about a review hold. We're talking about potential project nullification. Criminal referral is not off the table." Lucian stood in the corner by the Heritage coat room and felt the full weight of this evening settle onto him with a finality he had not been prepared for. Not the weight of the dining room confrontation, not the weight of the membership scanner, not even the weight of discovering that his ex-wife chaired the governing authority of his most important project. The weight of something older than tonight. The weight of a decision made 18 months ago in a conference room when he was tired and under pressure and chose the expedient path and told himself that was the same as the right path. "Who filed the disclosure complaint?" he asked. Mitchell was quiet for 2 seconds. "The filing is anonymous. Alliance policy protects the identity of compliance whistleblowers." Lucian turned and looked across the Heritage dining room, looked at the table by the fireplace, looked at Cassandra, who was sitting in the same position she had occupied all evening, both hands around her cup, her face turned slightly toward the window. She had been in the building for 2 hours before he arrived. She had said she had a meeting. She had recused herself from his file formally and on record. She had said it herself, because she had no interest in using institutional authority for personal reasons. But a whistleblower complaint was not filed by the chair. It was filed by anyone who had access to the information and believed the information was relevant. It could be anyone. It could be a compliance officer who had reviewed the Greenway documents independently. It could be a staff attorney in the Alliance's legal division. It could be someone who had been watching the Meridian project for months and had finally decided to act. It could be anyone. That was the thing about institutions that actually functioned. The chair didn't have to do anything. The chair just had to run a place where people who cared about the rules were empowered to follow them. "Mitchell," Lucian said, "get the full team together. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. I need everyone in the room." "I'll make it happen." "Lucian." A pause. "How bad is the Greenway situation?" "Honestly." Lucian thought about the decision made 18 months ago, thought about the conference room and the tiredness and the pressure and the expedient path. Thought about the moment when he had known underneath the rationalizations that the correct thing and the easy thing were not the same thing, and had chosen anyway. "It's bad," he said. "Come prepared." He hung up. He stood in the corner for another moment. Then he walked back across the Heritage dining room, past tables that had been watching him all evening, past Gerald, who tracked his movement with the careful attention of a man managing a complex situation, past the booth where Simone still sat with her untouched dessert and her careful expression. He arrived at Cassandra's table. She looked up at him. She read his face the way she had always been able to read his face, with the accuracy that had charmed him early in their marriage and unsettled him later, because it was difficult to manage a person who could see past your management. "Something's happened," she said. "Not a question." "The Greenway parcel," he said. "There's a disclosure complaint with your compliance division." Her expression did not change. "I'm recused from your file." "I know. I'm not asking you to do anything about it." He looked at her. "I'm telling you because you're going to hear about it. And because—" He stopped, tried again. "Because I want to stop having conversations with you that don't include the actual truth." Cassandra was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is the complaint accurate?" The question was direct. No cushioning, no diplomatic framing, just the question. Lucian held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "It is." The word cost him something. He felt it leave, the weight of 18 months of rationalization departing in one syllable. Cassandra nodded slowly. "Then you need a very good attorney and a willingness to cooperate fully with the review process." She paused. "And you need to stop making decisions based on what's expedient." "I know that." "You've known it for a long time," she said. "Knowing isn't the same as doing." He stood there, a man who had walked into this building 2 hours ago, believing he held every advantage in every room he entered, standing at his pregnant ex-wife's table at 9:23 in the evening, having just confirmed to her that a federal disclosure complaint against his company was accurate. "Why did you marry me?" he asked. The question came from somewhere he hadn't planned to go, but it was out now, real and unretractable in the room. Cassandra looked at him, and the expression that crossed her face was the saddest thing he had seen all evening, sadder than anything that had happened at the peak of the confrontation, sadder than the membership scanner, sadder than the moment she'd said the word chair and watched his world rearrange itself. Because this expression was not about power or institutions or authority. This expression was about two people and the time between them and what had been possible once and wasn't anymore. "Because you were brilliant," she said, "and because I thought the part of you that was brilliant was also the part of you that was good." She held his gaze. "I was wrong about that. They were separate, and the good part was smaller than I thought." He absorbed that. "Is it too small to work with?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time, at this man she had married and lost and spent 16 months being dismantled by. At this man who had pointed his finger at her face in a crowded restaurant and called her a gold digger, and then 4 hours later was standing at her table asking her whether there was still enough good in him to do something with. "That's not a question I can answer for you," she said. "It's not my job to answer it." "No," he said, "it isn't. Go call your attorneys, Lucian." He nodded. He reached into his jacket. He set something on the table beside her cup, his personal card, not a business card, the one with only his direct number and nothing else. The card he gave to fewer than 10 people. "When you're ready," he said. "For the real conversation, not attorneys, not the project, the other one." Cassandra looked at the card. She looked at him. "Get some sleep," she said. "You look terrible." It was such a normal thing to say. Such an ordinary, human, unstrategic thing to say in the middle of everything that the evening had been. And it was for reasons neither of them could have articulated the thing that cracked something open, not in the room, not between them, but somewhere in Lucian himself. In the place that was behind the acquisitions and the boardrooms and the platinum membership card and the 11 years of constructing a version of himself that could walk into any room and believe it belonged there. He turned and walked back toward his booth. Simone had her coat on. "I'm going to go," she said. Her voice was careful, understanding. The voice of a woman who had watched something real happen in front of her and had the intelligence to know when she was on the wrong side of it. "Call me when—" She stopped, reassessed. Take care of yourself, Lucian." She left. Lucian sat alone in his corner booth. He ordered coffee. He looked across the room at Cassandra, who had her phone out now, and was reading something, one hand resting on her stomach, her face composed and private in the way of someone who has returned to their own life after a detour. The heritage moved around him. Gerald cleared a table near the window. Patricia Harmon passed through the room, and her eyes moved briefly to Lucian before moving away, not with hostility, not with satisfaction, simply with the neutral acknowledgement of a professional who has managed a difficult situation and is now managing the rest of her evening. Lucian's coffee arrived. He wrapped both hands around the cup. He looked at his phone. Mitchell's number was still on the screen. 7 a.m., the whole team, the Greenway situation, the disclosure complaint, the $400 million and 3 years of work, and the investors whose money was tied to his guarantee, and the decision made 18 months ago in a conference room when he was tired. All of it waiting for him in the morning. He looked across the room one more time. Cassandra's car arrived at 9:45, exactly as Thomas Carey had confirmed. Gerald appeared at her table to let her know. She gathered herself with the deliberate care of a woman 8 months pregnant, a movement that was slower than it used to be, more considered more physical, and Gerald was there before she fully stood, not making a production of it, just present and ready, in the way of someone who understood what being useful actually meant. She did not look at Lucian as she moved toward the exit. She didn't need to. The evening had said everything that needed saying. But at the Heritage's front door, she paused. She turned. She looked at him across the length of the room, this man in his corner booth, with his coffee and his phone, and the ruins of an evening that had dismantled more than he could fully account for yet. She held the look for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked out into the Georgetown night, and the Heritage's door closed behind her, and she was gone. Lucian sat with his coffee. Around him, the Heritage continued its evening, its murmur, its candlelight, its practiced quiet, its patient walls that had held so many versions of so many evenings for so many years. Walls that had held tonight something that would take a long time to finish being understood. He sat for another 20 minutes. When he finally stood and signaled for his check, the Heritage's night manager, a young man who had been working the late shift for 3 years and had never once had a reason to look at Lucian Kensington with anything other than professional deference, brought the bill and stood waiting with the polite patience of his position. Lucian looked at the total. He looked at the line for membership discount. The line was blank. The full rate had been charged. His platinum status, suspended, pending review. He paid the full rate. He put on his coat. He walked out into the Georgetown night. His car was there. His driver had been waiting as drivers do in the particular patient suspension of someone whose job is to be ready when they are needed. "Home, Mr. Kensington." Lucian stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Cold air, dark sky. The city moving around him unhurried and indifferent, carrying everything forward without commentary. "Yes," he said, "home." He got in. The door closed. The car moved into traffic. And as the Heritage's lit windows shrank in the rear glass, Lucian Kensington sat in the back of his car with his hands in his lap and his phone dark, and the card with Mitchell's number, and the card with Cassandra's attorney's number, and his own direct line card, the one he had left on her table, the one she had not picked up in his presence, the one he did not know whether she had kept, and he thought about expedient decisions and their distances from correct ones. He thought about a man who mistakes access for power. He thought about a woman who had held both quietly for years and had never needed the room to know it. The Georgetown lights faded. The car moved on. And somewhere across the city, in a different car, headed in a different direction, Cassandra rested one hand on her stomach and watched the same lights pass her window and thought about whatever it is that women think about when they have just watched the future arrive in a shape they always knew it would come in, even when they couldn't see its face clearly yet. The city held both of them. It held everything the way cities do, without judgment, without ceremony, without explanation. Just forward, always forward. Lucian did not sleep. He got home at 10:47, poured 2 fingers of bourbon he did not drink, and sat at the desk in his study with his laptop open and the Heritage's public records pulled up on one screen and the Alliance's organizational charter on another. He read for 3 hours. He read with the focused, methodical attention of a man who had built a career on understanding the architecture of institutions, who owned what, who governed whom, which authority superseded which, where the real decisions lived beneath the visible ones. The National Heritage Alliance had been chartered in 1987. It governed historic preservation standards, membership structures, and cultural institution oversight across 14 states. Its chair position rotated every 3 years through election by the full board. The previous chair had been a 72-year-old architect named Bernard Forsyth, who had held the position for 2 terms and retired citing health reasons. Cassandra had been elected unanimously. Lucian read that twice, unanimously. 14 board members, 14 votes, 1 name. He scrolled through the Alliance's project oversight registry. The Meridian Corridor appeared on page 3, filed under Historic Preservation Impact Review, Status Active Investigation, Lead Reviewer Alliance Compliance Division, Chair recusal documented and dated 14 months ago, 2 weeks after Cassandra had taken the position. She had recused herself before the project even broke ground, before the Greenway acquisition was finalized, before Lucian had any reason to believe the Alliance's authority would matter to his timeline. She had done it because it was correct, not because it was convenient. He closed the laptop at 1:43 in the morning and sat in the dark of his study and thought about the word unanimous. 7 a.m. arrived with the particular cruelty of mornings that follow nights when you haven't slept. Mitchell Graves was already in the conference room when Lucian arrived at 6:52, which told Lucian everything about how seriously Mitchell was taking this. Mitchell was a man who arrived at 8 billed from 9 and considered 7 a.m. a time zone that existed only for emergencies. This was an emergency. The team assembled around the table. Mitchell, 2 junior partners, a compliance specialist named Andrea Cho, who had joined the firm 8 months ago and who Lucian was about to discover was the sharpest person in the room, and a crisis communications consultant named Paul Reeves, who had been called at 11 p.m. and had driven in from Bethesda. "Walk me through the Greenway acquisition," Mitchell said. No preamble, no warm-up. Everything. Lucian walked them through it. He had made a decision in the car on the way home the night before that the conversation Cassandra had ended part 3, with stop making decisions based on what's expedient, was going to be the operating principle of this meeting. He told them everything. The historic designation question that arose in month 2 of the acquisition process. The assessment that had identified the Greenway parcel's eastern boundary as potentially qualifying for protective status under the Alliance's preservation codes. The conversation with the acquisition attorney, a man named Dressler, who was no longer with the firm, about how to handle the assessment. The decision to classify the assessment as preliminary and inconclusive and proceed with acquisition without triggering the full disclosure requirement. When he finished, the room was quiet in the way of a room where 7 people are all thinking the same thing, and nobody is certain who should say it first. Andrea Cho said it first. "The assessment wasn't preliminary," she said. Her voice was even. She was 29 years old and had the quality of someone who had spent her career being underestimated and had long since stopped being bothered by it. "I pulled the original document this morning. It was a complete assessment. The preliminary classification was applied afterward. There's a version history." Lucian looked at her. Dressler applied the classification. Dressler applied it, but the instruction came from somewhere. She held his gaze. "The version history shows the document was accessed from your firm's internal system before the reclassification." The room got quieter. "I need to know," Mitchell said, looking directly at Lucian, "whether you gave that instruction." Lucian was quiet for a moment. The moment lasted long enough that Paul Reeves, the crisis communications consultant, picked up his pen and set it down again. "I told Dressler to find a path that didn't slow the acquisition," Lucian said. "I told him the timeline was critical. I told him the preliminary classification was the cleanest outcome." He paused. "I didn't explicitly instruct the reclassification, but I created the conditions for it." Mitchell absorbed this. "That distinction matters legally. It does not matter to the Alliance's compliance process." "I know. And it will not matter," Mitchell continued, "to Brannigan and Associates when they find out their $40 million is tied to a project under federal compliance investigation." The call came at 9:17. It was not from Brannigan himself. It was from Brannigan's legal team, which was worse. When a man's attorneys call instead of the man, it means the man has already made a decision and is having it delivered in language designed to minimize his personal exposure. The gist delivered in 7 precise minutes of legal vocabulary was this: Brannigan and Associates was exercising the material adverse change clause in their investment agreement. Their $40 million was in escrow pending resolution of the compliance investigation. If the investigation resulted in project nullification, the escrow would revert to them with penalties attached. If Lucian could not demonstrate a credible path to compliance resolution within 30 days, they would initiate withdrawal proceedings. 30 days. Lucian sat at the head of his conference table after the call ended and looked at the wall. "Who else is going to call?" Mitchell asked. "Thornfield Capital," Lucian said. "They're watching Brannigan. If Brannigan moves, Thornfield follows. That's another $60 million. He paused. "And the city's financing package is contingent on clean federal compliance standing. If the Alliance investigation isn't resolved favorably, the city pulls its letters of support and the whole tax credit structure collapses." Mitchell set down his pen. "What is the total exposure if the project nullifies?" Lucian looked at the table. $380 million, plus the land, plus 3 years. A pause. Plus whatever criminal referral looks like. Paul Reeves, the crisis communications consultant, had been quiet through most of this. He was a pragmatic man who had handled situations ranging from corporate fraud to personal scandal and had learned that the most useful thing he could do in the first hour of a crisis was listen until he understood what the actual problem was, as distinct from what everyone in the room thought the actual problem was. "Can I ask something?" Paul said. "Go ahead," Lucian said. "The Alliance chair. Your ex-wife." He chose his words with the care of a man crossing a surface he hasn't tested yet. "She recused herself from your file 14 months ago. She documented it. She followed the process exactly." He paused. "Is there a version of this where she's also the reason you have a path through it?" The room looked at Paul. Then the room looked at Lucian. Lucian thought about a direct line card left on a table, a card he didn't know whether she had kept. "Explain what you mean," he said. "The Alliance ran a compliant process," Paul said. "Your file went through normal channels. The disclosure complaint was filed by an unknown party, not the chair who was recused. The compliance investigation was triggered by that complaint, not by any action the chair took." He leaned forward. "Which means the chair is not your adversary in this investigation. She's a neutral, and a neutral who has every professional incentive to run a fair process because her reputation, her unanimous election, her institutional standing is based on running fair processes." A pause. "Fair processes can go in your favor if the underlying facts support them." "The underlying facts," Mitchell said carefully, "include a reclassified assessment." "Yes," Paul said. "And the underlying response to those facts is going to determine the outcome more than the facts themselves." He looked at Lucian. "Cooperation, full disclosure, voluntary correction of the record, demonstrated commitment to compliance going forward." He paused. "That's a very different story than the one the disclosure complaint is telling, but you have to tell it first and tell it completely." Lucian sat with this for a moment. Then his phone buzzed on the table. The screen showed a number he didn't recognize. He would have ignored it, except that his direct line was known only to a small group of people, and unknown numbers on a direct line were never random. He answered. "Mr. Kensington." A woman's voice, professional, familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place. "This is Andrea Walsh. I'm the General Counsel for the National Heritage Alliance." Lucian went very still. Around the table, Mitchell had put down his coffee. "Ms. Walsh," Lucian said. "I'm calling as a professional courtesy," she said. "The Alliance's Compliance Division is prepared to issue formal notice to your legal team by end of business today. Before that happens, our chair has authorized me to extend an invitation for a preliminary compliance conversation. Informal, not on record, for the purpose of establishing whether there is a cooperative path forward before the formal process moves to its next stage." Lucian looked at Mitchell. Mitchell was already nodding the nod of an attorney who recognizes a lifeline when he hears one and is trying to communicate "don't say anything stupid" without moving his mouth. "When?" Lucian asked. "Tomorrow," Andrea Walsh said. 10 a.m., Alliance offices. "We'll be there." A pause on Walsh's line. Mr. Kensington, the chair will not be present. She remains recused. The conversation will be with our compliance director and myself. Another pause. But I want to be clear about something. This invitation exists because the chair believes that institutions function best when they give people the opportunity to correct course before the formal record is the only record. A beat. Don't make her wrong about that. The line went quiet. Lucian set his phone down on the table. The room was very still. She gave you a door, Mitchell said. She gave the institution a door, Lucian said. There's a difference. He looked at Andrea Cho. I need everything on the Greenway assessment. Original documents, version history, Dressler's communications, everything. By 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll have it by 6, Andrea said. And I need the corrected assessment prepared, what it would have looked like if the accurate classification had been applied from the beginning. Andrea looked at him. That document acknowledges the error. Yes, Lucian said. It does. She nodded once and made a note. At 11:45 that morning, Lucian's assistant forwarded him an email. It had been sent to his firm's general inbox, not his direct line, a deliberate choice. The choice of someone who understood the difference between personal and professional communication and was drawing a careful line between them. The sender was listed as the Office of the Alliance Chair. The subject line read, Document Request, Meridian Corridor, Heritage Impact. It was a standard compliance document request. Routine in form, exactly the kind of thing the Alliance's office sent to every project under review. But attached to the standard form was a single handwritten line scanned and included as a separate page. No signature, no identifying information. Just 7 words in handwriting Lucian recognized from 3 years of signed cards and shared notes, and the particular way she formed the letters of certain words. It read, The door is open. What you do with it is yours. Lucian read the line 4 times. He printed it, he folded it, he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket next to his heart, without analyzing why he did this. Some gestures exist before the reasoning catches up to them. The afternoon moved through its hours the way afternoons do when the morning has already held everything important. Calls were made, documents were pulled. Mitchell's team worked with the focused efficiency of people who understood the stakes and had been given a clear direction. Paul Reeves drafted 3 versions of a public statement. One for if the compliance conversation went well, one for if it went neutrally, one for if it went badly, and Lucian read all 3 and chose to think only about the first one. At 3 p.m. his phone rang. This time he recognized the number. Thornfield Capital. He had been expecting this call since 9 that morning. Lucian. Douglas Thornfield's voice. Douglas was 64, had made his first fortune in infrastructure, and had a quality of directness that Lucian had always respected. Talk to me. The Alliance has invited a compliance conversation, Lucian said. Tomorrow morning, I'm going in with full documentation and full cooperation. A pause. What does full cooperation mean? It means I'm correcting the record on the Greenway assessment, voluntarily, before they ask me to. Another pause. Longer. That's going to be expensive. Yes. Potentially project-altering. Possibly. But not project-ending, Douglas said. It was not quite a question. Not if the compliance process validates the corrected record and the revised impact assessment supports continued development, Lucian said. The architecture of the project doesn't change. The eastern boundary gets a preservation buffer. We lose about 8% of the planned footprint. Redesign is possible. 8% is $22 million in development value. I know. And you're prepared to absorb that. I'm prepared to do what's correct, Lucian said. And then because Douglas Thornfield was 64 years old and had survived enough to know the difference between a rehearsed line and something a person had actually decided. He added, I had a conversation last night that reminded me those aren't always the same thing. I've been slow to learn that. I'm learning it now. Silence on Douglas's end, the particular silence of a man recalibrating. The Heritage Dinner, Douglas said. I heard about it. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. From whom? James Okafor called me this morning. A pause. James was there last night, Lucian, 2 tables away from where you were standing when you said what you said to your ex-wife. James Okafor, who sat on the Alliance's advisory council, who had been at the Meridian groundbreaking, who had apparently been at the Heritage the night before, which Lucian had not known, because when you believe you are the most important person in a room, you stop tracking the other people in it with any real attention. "What did James say?" Lucian asked. "He said he watched something change in the room when your ex-wife didn't react to what you said. He said he's been in a lot of rooms with a lot of powerful people, and he has a pretty reliable sense of who actually holds the authority in a situation." A pause. "He said the authority in that room was not where you thought it was." "No," Lucian said. "It wasn't." "He also said something else," Douglas continued. "He said that at the end of the evening, he saw you sit back down at her table, and he said the look on your face when you sat down was the first honest look he's seen on you in 3 years of knowing you." Lucian was quiet. "I'm keeping my position in the project," Douglas said, "pending the compliance outcome. But Lucian, this is not just about the Greenway parcel. You understand that." "I understand that." "Good." Another pause. "How is she?" The question landed simply. No strategy in it, just a man asking about a person. "She looked well," Lucian said. "She looks like someone who has figured out exactly who she is." "And you?" Lucian looked at the window of his office, at the city outside it, at the afternoon that was moving toward evening, carrying everything forward. "I'm working on it," he said. Douglas made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a year." A pause. "Call me after tomorrow's meeting." "I will." The call ended. At 4:30, Andrea Cho knocked on his office door. She came in and set a folder on his desk, thick-tabbed, organized with the precision of someone who understood that the quality of documentation was going to determine a great deal of what came next. "Everything's in there," she said. "Original assessment version history, Dressler's email chain, the corrected assessment, and a timeline document that shows the sequence clearly." She paused. "I also included a memo." "What kind of memo?" "The kind that explains in clear language that the decision-making environment that led to the Greenway reclassification was created by time pressure and a culture of prioritizing outcomes over process." She held his gaze. "It doesn't name you specifically. It describes a pattern, but anyone reading it will understand the origin." Lucian looked at the folder. "You wrote a memo about my management culture." "I wrote a memo about organizational decision-making under pressure," she said. "It's accurate. It's also the kind of thing compliance divisions find useful. It shows that the problem has been diagnosed and the organization understands how to prevent recurrence." A pause. "It's also the kind of thing that changes how they see you when you walk into that room tomorrow." Lucian picked up the folder. He looked at this 29-year-old compliance specialist who had been in his firm for 8 months, who had pulled original documents at 6 in the morning, who had identified the version history before anyone else in the room, and who had just written a memo that was going to be one of the most important documents he walked into a government office with in his professional life. "How long have you known about the version history?" he asked. She met his gaze. 6 weeks. The room went very quiet. "You filed the disclosure complaint," Lucian said. Andrea Cho did not look away, did not look apologetic, did not perform any of the things a person performs when they are afraid of what comes next. She looked at him with the steady clarity of someone who had made a decision they believed in and had been waiting to be accountable for it. "Yes," she said. Lucian set the folder down. He stood. He walked to the window and stood there for a moment with his back to the room, looking at the city breathing. Behind him, Andrea did not move. He turned around. "You did the right thing," he said. She blinked. Once. The only sign that the response had surprised her. "I know," she said, "but I wasn't sure you'd see it that way." "I'm seeing a lot of things differently today." He looked at her. "You still have a position here. That's not contingent on this. Are we clear?" "Yes," she said, and then "thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "You enforce the standard. I should have said it." She nodded. She picked up her notepad from the chair where she'd set it. She moved toward the door. "Ms. Cho," Lucian said. She turned. "Tomorrow morning, I want you in that room with me." She paused. I'm the person who filed against your company. You're the person who knew what the right thing was and did it under pressure, Lucian said. That's exactly who I want in that room. She held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded once and left. Lucian sat back down at his desk. The folder was in front of him. He opened it. He read from the beginning, from the original Greenway assessment, from the clean, unaltered version that showed the Eastern Boundaries historic qualification in clear language through the version history that showed what happened next through the corrected document that Andrea had prepared through the memo about organizational culture and decision-making under pressure. He read for 2 hours. At 6:47 p.m., his personal phone lit up. Not a call, a message. From a number he had stored in his contacts that morning under a single initial C. The message was 4 words. How did today go? Not a question mark. The particular punctuation of someone who is asking out of genuine interest, but does not want to create pressure around the answer. Lucian looked at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "Harder than I expected, better than I deserved." He watched the screen. 3 dots appeared indicating she was typing. The dots ran for a moment. Then they stopped. Then they appeared again. Then they stopped. Then the message arrived. That's a start. Lucian read it twice. He set his phone face down on the desk. He picked up the folder. He had 3 more hours of reading to do before he was ready for tomorrow, and he was going to do all of it, and he was going to do it correctly. Outside his window, Washington moved through its evening. The city that held everything, the institutions and the authority and the compliance divisions and the historic preservation reviews and the $40 million escrows and the disclosure complaints and the unanimous elections and the direct line cards and the forward text messages and the particular complicated human architecture of 2 people who had been married and separated and were now at a distance, navigating something that didn't have a clear name yet. The city moved. It did not explain itself. It simply held everything. And in an office 14 blocks away, Cassandra put her phone in her bag and pressed both hands against her stomach and felt the baby move a long, rolling movement, unhurried and certain, and closed her eyes for a moment in the particular private way of a woman who is carrying something precious and knows it and does not need anyone else in the room to know it with her. The evening was quiet. Tomorrow was coming. And for the first time in 16 months, both of them were facing the same direction. The Alliance's offices were on the 7th floor of a building 3 blocks from the Capitol, and Lucian arrived at 9:42 a.m., 18 minutes early, which was something he had not done for a professional meeting in years. Mitchell was already in the lobby. Andrea Cho was beside him, carrying the folder with both hands, her posture composed and exact. None of them spoke much in the elevator. There was nothing left to rehearse. Either the folder was enough or it wasn't. Either the decision to walk in with the complete truth was the right decision, or it was the most expensive one Lucian had ever made. He had stopped being able to distinguish between those 2 possibilities somewhere around 2 a.m. and had decided in the particular clarity that arrives only after you have been awake long enough for all the rationalizations to burn off, that they might be the same thing. The compliance director's name was Victor Salles. He was 57, had been with the Alliance for 19 years, and had the quality of someone whose entire professional identity was built on the integrity of a process he believed in completely. He shook hands without warmth, but without hostility. He was fair in the way of a man who has chosen fairness as a discipline rather than a disposition. Andrea Walsh, the general counsel, sat to his left. She had a legal pad and a pen and the same professional neutrality she had used on the phone, the neutrality of someone who was there to facilitate accuracy, not to advocate for an outcome. They sat. The folder was on the table between Lucian's team and Victor Salles. "Thank you for coming," Victor said. "I want to clarify the purpose of this conversation before we begin. This is a preliminary dialogue under the Alliance's Cooperative Disclosure Protocol. Nothing said here constitutes a formal admission or waiver of any legal right. The purpose is to determine whether a cooperative path forward exists before the formal investigation proceeds to its next stage." "Understood," Mitchell said. "Good." Victor looked at Lucian directly. "Mr. Kensington, I've reviewed your project file extensively. I know what the disclosure complaint alleges. Before I ask you anything, I want to give you the opportunity to tell me what happened with the Greenway assessment in your own words." Lucian looked at the folder. Then he looked at Victor Salles, and he told him everything. The same way he had told his team at 7 a.m. the previous morning, but cleaner this time, less defensive architecture around it, less of the instinctive legal hedging that had been Mitchell's contribution to the morning version. Just the sequence of what happened and the decisions that were made and who made them and why. The assessment, the timeline pressure, Dressler, the reclassification. The word he had said to Dressler, find a path, and what he had understood that to mean, and what he had chosen not to examine about what it would require. He spoke for 11 minutes without interruption. When he stopped, the room was quiet. Victor Salles looked at the folder. May I? Lucian pushed it across the table. Victor opened it. He read with the focused speed of someone who had read thousands of compliance documents and knew exactly where to look. He reached the corrected assessment. He read it. He reached Andrea's memo. He read it twice. He set it down. He looked at Andrea Cho, who was sitting to Lucian's left. You wrote this memo, he said. It was not a question. Something in the prose had identified her to him. Yes, she said. You also filed the disclosure complaint. Yes. Victor looked at her for a long moment. The look of a man recognizing something he respects. You work for his firm. I do. And you filed against his project. I filed against a compliance violation, she said. The employer is incidental to the violation. Victor held her gaze. Then he made a note on his legal pad. One line, he underlined it. Ms. Walsh, he said. I want the Alliance's hiring committee to know this name. Andrea Walsh made a note of her own. Andrea Cho's expression did not change. But something in her posture shifted the microscopic adjustment of a person who has just been recognized in a way they did not expect and are processing quietly. Lucian watched it happen. He had given her the folder and put her in this room because she was the right person to be in it. He was now watching the room confirm that in real time. Victor turned back to Lucian. The corrected assessment. You prepared this voluntarily. Yes. Before receiving formal notice of the investigation's scope. Yes. Why? The question was simple and direct, and deserved a simple and direct answer. Because it's accurate, Lucian said, and because I was told by someone whose judgment I've been slow to trust that being accurate is more important than being comfortable. A pause. I'm trying to act on that. Victor set down his pen. He looked at Lucian with the assessing look of a man who has spent 19 years distinguishing between people who are sorry they got caught and people who are sorry about what they did. The corrected assessment changes the development envelope for the Meridian Corridor, Victor said. The eastern boundary requires a 30-foot preservation buffer. Your current permits assume full development to the property line. We've modeled the revision, Mitchell said. 8.3% reduction in total footprint. The project remains viable. The permit revision requires full board approval from the Alliance, Victor said. Standard timeline is 90 days. We know, Mitchell said. Your financing agreements are being renegotiated, Lucian said. Douglas Thornfield is holding. Brannigan's attorneys are in conversation with Mitchell's team. The 30-day material adverse change window gives us time to present the compliance resolution as a path to clean standing. Victor made another note. And the Dressler communication chain. You're prepared to make this available to the formal record. All of it, Lucian said. Victor looked at Andrea Walsh. Something passed between them. The shorthand of two professionals who have worked together long enough to communicate in looks. Walsh gave a small nod. Mr. Kensington, Victor said, I'm going to be direct with you. The compliance violation here is real. The reclassification of the Greenway assessment was improper, and it will be formally noted in the investigation record. That doesn't disappear. He paused. But the cooperative disclosure protocol exists precisely for situations where an organization identifies a violation, corrects it voluntarily, and demonstrates a credible commitment to remediation. When that protocol is followed in good faith completely and accurately, the Alliance's standard outcome is a compliance order with conditions rather than a criminal referral or project nullification. The words landed in the room. Mitchell let out a breath that he had been holding from the sound of it since the previous morning. The conditions, Lucian said. The corrected assessment is formally adopted. The 30-foot buffer is legally incorporated into the development permits. A compliance monitor is appointed to the project for the duration of construction, and a remediation contribution is made to the Alliance's Historic Preservation Fund. Victor looked at him. The contribution amount reflects the scope of the violation. I'll have a figure to your attorneys by end of week. Understood, Lucian said. If all conditions are met, the compliance investigation closes with a formal resolution. Clean standing is restored. Your financing agreements proceed on the corrected basis. Victor paused. This is not a favor, Mr. Kensington. This is the process working the way it's supposed to work when everyone in the room tells the truth. Lucian looked at him. I understand that. Good. Victor stood. He extended his hand. We'll have the formal documentation to your counsel within 48 hours. Lucian shook his hand. As they were leaving, Andrea Walsh stopped him at the door. Mitchell and Andrea Cho had moved into the corridor, and Walsh spoke quietly with the particular care of someone who is operating at the edge of what their role allows. The chair asked me to give you something, she said. She took a small envelope from the inside pocket of her jacket and held it out. Lucian took it. It was sealed. His name was written on the front in handwriting he recognized. Thank you, he said. Walsh nodded once and turned back into the conference room. In the elevator, Mitchell was already on his phone calling Brannigan's attorneys with the update. Andrea Cho stood beside Lucian in silence. Lucian held the envelope and did not open it in the elevator. He waited until they were in the lobby, until Mitchell had moved toward the exit, still talking, until it was just him standing near the building's entrance with the envelope in his hand. He opened it. One page. Her handwriting. Not the Alliance letterhead, not a formal document. Just her handwriting on personal stationery, the kind of thing that exists outside the institutional record entirely. It read, "The process worked because you let it. That matters more than you know right now. The other conversation, the one that isn't about projects or compliance or attorneys whenever you're ready, not before." See, he read it twice. He folded it carefully and put it in the same inside pocket where he had been carrying the previous note, next to his heart again. Still not analyzing why. The compliance order arrived formally on Thursday. The remediation contribution figure arrived Friday morning, significant expected fare. Lucian signed the acknowledgement on Friday afternoon without attempting to negotiate it down, which surprised Mitchell and did not surprise Andrea Cho. Brannigan's attorneys presented with the compliance resolution documentation on Friday lifted the escrow hold by end of business. The material adverse change clause they noted in their formal communication had been triggered by a compliance uncertainty that was now resolved with clear conditions. The investment position would be maintained on the revised project basis. Douglas Thornfield called personally. "You did it right," he said. "That matters in this city." "I had help understanding that," Lucian said. "I know," Douglas said. "Say thank you properly when the time is right." The Meridian Corridor's revised permits were filed with the city on the following Monday. The 8.3% footprint reduction was absorbed into a redesign that the project architect, a woman named Sylvia Cheng, who had it turned out privately, considered the eastern boundary development aggressive from the beginning, described as actually improving the project's relationship to the historic district. The 30-foot preservation buffer, she told Lucian in their first meeting after the revision, gave the building room to breathe in a way the original plan had not. Good design. Sylvia said, usually has something to do with restraint. Lucian thought about that for a long time after she left. 3 weeks after the Heritage Dinner on a Thursday morning that was cold and bright in the particular way of Washington in late fall, Lucian's phone rang at 8 a.m. The number was one he knew. "I have a doctor's appointment at 10, Cassandra said. "The last major one before the due date, and A pause, a careful pause, the kind that contains a decision being made in real time. "I don't want to go alone." Lucian was already standing. "I'll be there." Another pause. "Don't read too much into this." "I won't. I'm serious, Lucian." "I know you are," he said. "I'll be there at 9:45. I'll stand wherever you tell me to stand, and I won't say anything unless you ask me to. And if you change your mind and want me to leave, I'll leave." A long pause. 9:45, she said. "Yes." She hung up. He stood in his kitchen at 8 in the morning holding his phone and feeling something he hadn't felt in so long. He had almost forgotten it had a name. Not happiness exactly. Something more tentative than happiness. The feeling of a door that has been closed for a very long time, standing slightly open, not open enough to walk through, yet not open enough to know what's on the other side, but open, definitely, undeniably open. He was there at 9:42. She was waiting in the lobby of the medical building, seated her coat over her arm, looking at her phone with the focused expression she used when she was reading something that required her full attention. She looked up when he came through the door. She looked at him the way she had looked at him at the end of the Heritage evening, the 3-second look that contained more than most people communicated in an hour. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to be late," he said. She stood. He moved to help, and she accepted it, his hand at her elbow for the 3 seconds it took her to get her balance. And then she was standing, and he stepped back to the appropriate distance, and they walked toward the elevator without either of them acknowledging what had just happened, which was the most natural 3 seconds they had shared in 4 years. The appointment was with Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had been Cassandra's OB for 2 years, and who looked at Lucian when he came in with the measured assessment of a doctor who has sat in many rooms with many complicated relationship configurations and has learned to take her cues from the patient. Cassandra introduced him simply, "This is Lucian the father," and Dr. Vasquez nodded and extended her hand and moved on without editorial. The ultrasound took 11 minutes. Lucian stood where Cassandra told him to stand to her left slightly back and watched the screen with the full attention of a man who had spent his entire adult life in rooms where things of consequence were happening and had never once felt the particular weight of consequence that he felt in this 11-minute window. A heartbeat, strong and regular and completely indifferent to the complicated history of the two people in the room. A heartbeat that had been beating since before the Heritage dinner, before the disclosure complaint, before the compliance meeting, before any of the things that had restructured Lucian's understanding of himself and his world. A heartbeat that had been there the whole time underneath everything. "Strong," Dr. Vasquez said. "Everything looks exactly right." Cassandra closed her eyes for a moment. The way she had closed them in the car outside the Alliance offices, the way she had closed them every time the baby moved in the last 8 months, that private interior moment of a woman in conversation with something only she could feel. When she opened them, she looked at Lucian. He was looking at the screen. His jaw was set in the way it's set when he was managing emotion rather than expressing it. His hands were at his sides. He was not performing anything. He was just standing there being present in the unguarded way of someone who has run out of performances. "She's healthy," Cassandra said. Lucian looked at her. Cassandra held his gaze. She confirmed. "I've known for 6 weeks." He absorbed this. A girl. A daughter. The word rearranged something in him so quickly and so completely that he didn't try to track the rearrangement, just felt it happen and stood inside it. "Does she have a name?" he asked. "I have one I'm considering," Cassandra said. "I haven't decided." "Okay," he said. And he meant it, the genuine okayness of a man who understands that some decisions are not his to make and is at peace with that. Dr. Vasquez printed images from the ultrasound and handed them to Cassandra, who looked at them for a moment and then, without deliberation, handed one to Lucian. He took it with both hands. They left the medical building at 11:23. The morning was cold and clear. They stood on the sidewalk outside, and the city moved around them in the way it always did, indifferent, unhurried, carrying everything forward. "Coffee," Lucian said. Cassandra looked at him. "Decaf." Obviously. There was a place on the next block. They walked to it slowly at her pace and sat at a table by the window. Lucian ordered her decaf without asking because he remembered how she took it from 3 years of watching her make it in their kitchen. He ordered black coffee for himself. The drinks arrived, and they sat with them, and the city passed outside the window. "The Alliance compliance order," Cassandra said. "I saw the formal resolution." "I assumed you would. You didn't negotiate the remediation contribution." "No." She looked at her cup. "That surprised some people." "It didn't surprise Andrea Cho," Lucian said. Something moved in Cassandra's expression, the near smile she used when something landed accurately. "No," she said. "I imagine it didn't." A pause. "She's extraordinary, by the way. The Alliance is going to try to hire her." "I know," Lucian said. "I'm going to make it very difficult for them. By paying her what she's worth. By paying her considerably more than she's worth, and then letting her demonstrate that I was wrong about the number." Cassandra looked at him, and the near smile became an actual smile, brief, real, the kind she didn't perform. The kind that had been there in the early part of their marriage, before the distance built between them and the performances became the default. "That's good management," she said. "I'm learning," he said. A pause. The coffee, the window, the city. "The baby," Lucian said. "I want to do this correctly. I don't have a model for what correctly looks like, but I want to build one." He looked at her. "I want her to know who I am. Not the version I perform, the actual one. Whatever that is while I'm figuring it out." Cassandra was quiet for a moment. "That's going to require consistency," she said. "Not gestures. Consistency. Showing up when it's inconvenient. Being present when there's nothing to manage or fix. Just being there." "I know." "You're not good at that?" "No," he said. "I'm not. I'm going to work on it." She looked at him with the direct, accurate look that had always been the thing he found most difficult about her, the look that saw past the construction to whatever was actually there. In the early years of their marriage, that look had made him feel known in a way nothing else did. Later, it had made him feel exposed, and he had mistaken those two things for the same thing and acted accordingly. The mistake had cost both of them enormously. "I kept the card," she said, "the one you left on the table." He looked at her. "I kept it that night," she said. "I looked at it for a long time in the car on the way home. I almost threw it away twice." A pause. "I didn't." "I know," he said. "You texted me." 4 words, she said. "That's not a commitment." "No," he said. "It's a start." She looked at him. He looked at her. And in the space between them, across a coffee table in a restaurant 3 blocks from the Capitol, 3 weeks after the most consequential evening of both their adult lives, something quiet and real and unperformed passed between 2 people who had been many things to each other and were now carefully and without illusion trying to figure out what came next. "My attorneys will contact Mitchell about the parenting agreement," she said. "I want it done before she arrives." "I'll tell him today." "I want reasonable," she said. "Not generous, not strategic. Reasonable." "Reasonable," he agreed. She picked up her cup. He picked up his. The morning moved around them. At 12:15, her car arrived. She gathered herself the deliberate, careful movement he had watched at the Heritage, the movement of a woman carrying something precious, and knowing it, and stood. He stood with her. "Thank you," she said, "for today." "Thank you for asking," he said. She looked at him one more time, that 3-second look, and in those 3 seconds Lucian Kensington, who had walked into the Heritage Dining Club 3 weeks earlier, as the most powerful man in the room, who had pointed his finger at this woman's face and called her things in front of 40 witnesses, who had built an empire on the assumption that power was something you held loudly and visibly and pressed down on the people beneath you, understood something that he could not have understood at the beginning of this story. Power was not what he had thought it was. It was not the platinum card, or the corner booth, or the 11-year membership, or the $400 million project. It was not the performance of authority, or the theater of consequence. It was something quieter and more durable than any of those things. It was the woman standing in front of him, who had sat by the fireplace in complete stillness while his world rearranged itself around her. It was the 29-year-old compliance specialist who had filed a disclosure complaint against her own employer because the rules were the rules. It was the floor manager who had held his position under direct pressure from a man accustomed to being obeyed. It was the process, the actual functioning, procedurally sound process of an institution that worked the way institutions were supposed to work when the people inside them decided that integrity was not negotiable. He had spent his entire career believing he was navigating power. He had actually been navigating access. And access, as he now understood with the full weight of 3 weeks of consequence, could be revoked by anyone who had the actual thing. Cassandra's car door closed. Lucian stood on the sidewalk. He put his hands in his pockets. The ultrasound image was folded carefully in his jacket, next to the 2 notes next to the Direct Line card she had not given back. He looked at the city around him, Washington carrying everything forward as it always did, without commentary, without pause. He had a 2 o'clock with Mitchell about the parenting agreement. He had a 4 o'clock with Sylvia Cheng about the revised Meridian design. He had a conversation to have with his father, who was 81 and living in Connecticut, that he had been postponing for longer than he could honestly account for a conversation about what it meant to be present and what it cost when you weren't. He had a great deal of work to do. He started walking. Not toward his car, not toward his office, just walking for a few blocks in the cold, clear air of a morning that was asking nothing of him except to move through it honestly. 3 blocks later, his phone buzzed. A message from Cassandra. She has her appointment. You have yours. Don't be late to either one. He stopped walking. He read it twice. He typed back, I won't be. He put his phone in his pocket. He kept walking. And that was the beginning, not of the story which had started long before the Heritage Dining Club, and not of the ending which had not arrived yet and would not arrive simply, but the beginning of something that did not have a name yet, that was too new and too careful and too honest to need one. The beginning of a man who had mistaken access for power, learning slowly at considerable cost, in the only classroom that ever really works, what the difference was. The beginning of accountability without performance, presence without management, truth without the careful architecture of a man who had spent his life believing that the construction was the same as the thing itself. The city held it all. It held everything the way cities always do, the institutions and the hearings and the ultrasound images and the 4-word text messages and the compliance orders and the remediation contributions and the parenting agreements not yet written and the daughter not yet born and the 2 people who had been married and broken and were now imperfectly and without guarantees choosing something better. It held all of it, and it moved forward, because that is what the truth does once it is finally told. It moves forward, and it does not stop.